for these harbors and ports. There's a lot of opportunity for us, I think, to collaborate. We've had an opportunity working with some of your delegation, some of the folks in the Valley that don't understand some of the problems you guys have with some of the water sources and dams that are here. We collaborate very closely with our legislative partners to try and make things actually happen. So the last thing I would like to comment on is that urban-rural divide that's out there. I see that on the national level all the time, and there's a lack of understanding by our folks in the cities about the plight that we have out here. Sometimes I feel like I'm in a petting zoo. I live in rural. I've got a farm, and I feel like I live in a petting zoo where the city people will come out and spend time and money in my backyard and look, isn't that nice, isn't that wonderful? With Kurt, he's running around with his animals and his hops, and oh, that's really good. Then they go back into the city and they pass all this legislation that makes it almost impossible for me to do what they seem to like to see and be a part of. And that's a big problem. That's why this group of bipartisan individuals can make a huge difference in your state legislature. And I try, with my colleagues in the Problem Solvers Caucus, to bridge these divides. Bridge these divides where there's an opportunity for folks to recognize that we have to drive a little further in rural Oregon. That should be taken into account. We also should be able to earn a living in rural Oregon. Agriculture in the Valley should be a viable enterprise that's respected and supported like it was back when Senate Bill 100 passed and we made sure farmers could afford to have farmland. Same thing in the forestry area. We should be able to make sure that we can work in the woods. That these communities, they're not going to have a Google set up, down in Reedsport. That's just not going to happen. But what we can do is make sure there's an industry there that can protect our forests from these horrible wildfires. We're closing down Ashland because of wildfires. I mean, come on, that's just terribly wrong. We have got to make sure that our folks in our urban areas understand that we can be part of the solution to your climate change and carbon pollution problems by just working thoughtfully in our forests. This is not the 1970s, it's not the 1980s. I think timber industry has learned that we overcut. We terribly overcut. But now it's time to put people back to work. The same thing in our fishing communities. The fishing community has been devastated in California, put out of business virtually. We have a viable, our fleet here, Oregon coast, is one of the most prolific and data managed groups in the United States of America. I talk to my colleagues back east, and there's all this infighting going on the East Coast about fishery policies. Our men and women here have sacrificed a lot. The whole catch share program basically shut down the rockfish industry for quite some time. Now the stocks are rebounding thanks to the help of the fishermen and the communities they represent, getting good information about where and what we should be doing. And that's the type of collaboration that gets this country moving forward and has made a huge difference. There's a great opportunity now for these fisheries to be sustainable and support these communities and frankly feed not just America, but the rest of the world. So I'm looking forward to the discussion today. We've got some really smart people here that care deeply and passionately about the community. You guys are very, very lucky to have a group of problem solvers here that want to actually get stuff done, represent the rural parts of our great state, the Oregon coast in particular. So with that, I think we're going to run into some questions, if that's okay, and give our colleagues a chance to respond.
I'll take a shot at it. The Coastal Caucus, for those of you that may not know how we operate, we are bicameral, bipartisan, and have operated on a consensus basis. So when we take on an issue and decide to make it a caucus issue, it is so says one, so says us all. And we have developed a Coastal Caucus agenda. We stay away from those things where we cannot agree. When we can agree, we end up representing almost 10% of the legislature. And I think we've had some significant successes using this consensus-driven model. Therein lies our greatest strength.
And I guess what I would say is that It is the strength of this group that we can go into a Coastal Caucus meeting, have a really raucous conversation, and walk out and still all be friends. Still have opportunity for the next conversation. Knowing that we couldn't get an agreement and therefore we weren't going to go as a group, that doesn't mean that we can't individually keep going after what we want, because we do. So we advocate for the things that are really important to each of us, but when we can get that moment when all of us can agree, it can make a big difference in talking to agencies and talking to our fellow legislators and getting legislation through. And I have to say that the bonds that we build through this cooperation and the fact that we get up at 7 o'clock every Wednesday morning, Thursday morning, every Thursday morning, to be at the building an hour before most of the rest of the people show up, and have those conversations builds really good relationships between all of us. I may not agree in a whole lot of ways with some of the other people on different issues, but that doesn't mean that they aren't people that I would really like to spend time and work with, because they bring something to every conversation. And the other thing I will say about all of the people on here, we probably should introduce ourselves when I pick up the microphone, so because not everybody knows everybody on the caucus. But the thing that at the end of the day, we get done with our meeting, we walk and we go and do our own things, but we also know that if a problem comes up, if there's something that we need to address, these other people will be there to support and listen to whatever you have to say. And I think it has helped build a really strong relationship, which is really what drives everything that happens in the legislature. It's all about a relationship building organization. Arnie Robles, Senate District 5, you were here in my district.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is David Brock-Smith, State Representative, House District 1. So, from Representative McEwen's district in Charleston, which she would like back, district.
It's coming. Just wait.
Down to the California border in Brookings Harbor, over to Westgate Junction on West I-5, to West Roseburg, and then back over to the beautiful city of Caucul and kind of around Coos Bay. And we do have the mayor of Caucul, Kathy Simonetti, in our audience today, as well as I want to give a shout out to Milt and Shirley Nelson. I ran into them earlier. Shirley Nelson is just an amazing historian when it comes to the Southern Oregon coast. Has written many books, and I am grateful for her work. And she lives up north now and is out of our community, but I wanted to thank them. And I also want to talk about how this bicameral, bipartisan group not only transcends the legislature, but also transcends down to the county commissioners. We have many of our counties that are of course nonpartisan, and they work very well together. So, many of which are here. Even Commissioner Menti Morris from Klamath County, whom I saw earlier, and Doug Hunt from Lincoln. You have an opportunity to where our county commissioners, and of course they work very well with their city counterparts, talk to us on a regular basis and keep us informed on what's happening in our rural communities on the coast at a level that we don't have the opportunity really to plug into. And it's a critically important relationship that we have. And we carry that bipartisan, bicameral work throughout the Coastal Caucus and our work together. And Senator Roebland and Senator Johnson said it best. We get there at 7 a.m., we hash it out in a closed door session, and we have our staff that are in the room under silence coming out of the building, but or out of the room. But we really work towards the things that are important to our coastal communities. If it's our fishing industries, if it's economic development, if it's the housing needs. I mean, as you saw in the video when it comes to Florence, we have a situation where you have roughly 750 to 1 million people that flood into this 9,000 member community every summer. Well, there's infrastructure that's necessary to deal with that, and that infrastructure requires funding. And that funding, a lot of it has to come from other areas than the taxpayers within the 9,000 people community, and the housing needs associated with it, and people that have to live an hour away just to drive to work to serve their breakfast. And so, as we move forward with this event, I can't thank you enough for being here as the chair of the Coastal Caucus, and we're all honored to help work with you to change things for the Oregon coast.
Well, good morning, everyone. David Gomberg from House 10, which stretches from Yahats to Tillamook along the Central Coast. And you've heard the phrases bicameral and bipartisan a couple of times. Let's make sure we understand what we're talking about here. Democrats and Republicans, senators and representatives all working together. All working together, which means that when we have a bill that we bring forward, that will go to a hearing, and it'll be senators and representatives and Republicans and Democrats. And a lot of you here in the room today have gone to those kind of hearings, and you know how unusual that is, and how important it is. And the result boils down, for me, to two words: disproportionate influence. Disproportionate influence that we build and apply to the benefit of our coastal districts. And I think that's what Oregonians want and Oregonians expect, for us to be able to work together and work in unison on common problems to find principled outcomes. There's one other thing I want to touch on very quickly, because I've heard mentioned several times today the urban-rural divide. And it's real in our country and it's real in our state, but I have to tell you, whenever I hear that phrase, I kind of sit up. Because when I hear urban-rural divide, what's going through my mind is the I-5 corridor in Eastern Oregon, and leaving out the Oregon coast in that conversation. And I think that's in the mind of everybody who's sitting up here at the front of the room. When we hear urban-rural divide, we want to make sure the coast is an important part of those ongoing Oregon conversations. And I'll tell you, in some parts of Oregon, the difficult questions we confront are easy to take a position on. It's easy in Eastern Oregon to take a position. It's easy in Lake Oswego to take a position. But I don't live and work in red Oregon or in blue Oregon. I live in purple Oregon. And every single one of these discussions, these issues that we confront, is very divisive in my part of Oregon, and we have to find a way to come together. That's the strength of the Coastal Caucus and the group that's sitting up here.
Hi everyone, my name is Tiffany Mitchell. I represent District 13, which goes all the way from Clatskanai in Clatsop County all the way down to about 3rd Street in Tillamook City. We also have a little bit of Washington County, Banks, and Gaston. So it's a large district. All of us have really, really large districts. They're very, very far apart, and one of the, I think, best parts about being on the Coastal Caucus is just seeing how similar the issues within our communities often are, and just realizing how important a resource that is for me as a brand new representative, to be able to work with this group of folks to really try to help my community as much as I can and to address some of those issues that really are important, that aren't necessarily seen by some of the more urban representatives and senators. So it's been an experience, and I have to say that as a new member, it's one of the more inclusive places that I've been in the legislature thus far, and it's just an incredibly welcoming group that it's been a really good place to be in.
Thanks, Tiffany. So my name is Dallas Hurd. I'm the senator from Southwest Oregon, Senate District 1, the good representative, and the chair of the caucus is one of my great representatives, and I like to call myself his co-pilot. David is just, I call him the machine back in district, and it's true, kind of like self-defense, he's another machine that's in the front row here. And so I've been in the legislature about 5 years now, and the first three and a half years I was in the House. And one of the things I loved about the House was the passion, the honesty, but the partisanship at times can be a bit overwhelming. And so I'll just be honest, my first three and a half years of being in the legislature, I was really struggling with the desire to keep coming back because of that partisanship, because of that dysfunction. And one of the major influences to the passion and the renewing of hope and things forward that I have now is much to do with this group here. And really just to explain the sincerity of that statement and what these other fine individuals have been saying is that I was heading home. I stay in Salem during the long session, Monday through Friday, but on Wednesday evenings I drive back to Southern Oregon so I can split the week up and be with my beautiful bride Hannah and my two young sons, Eli and Ezra. But that requires me to get up at about 3:30 in the morning to head back to Salem for the Coastal Caucus at 7 a.m. meeting. Well, I was getting into the elevator when the good co-chair of Ways and Means, Betsy Johnson, saw me running in there, and she said, "See you later." And she at that moment thought that I was going home for the week. So when I walked back in the next morning at 6:50 a.m., she looked at me like I had two heads on my shoulders, and I'm like, what is my hair falling off or what? And she's like, "No, you're here." I'm like, well, yeah, this is important, and it really is important. The unity of this group is very unique. I appreciate a lot of what the good Congressman said about folks need to start working together, and it really does need to start. It always starts at the grassroots from the standpoint of we, the voters, choose who is going to elect us as servant leaders in Congress, state legislatures, the executive branch. But then from there, it's on our shoulders to make sure that we actually act as servant leaders and seek to work together for the common good of all. And that sounds like a cheesy statement anymore, but I think it's probably never been more relevant than it is now to really push forward and actually really embrace that mentality of I'm not going to see you as a Republican or a Democrat. I'm not going to see you as a man or a woman or what race or gender or economic status, education. We really need to see each other as Oregonians, Americans. I've been greatly troubled by, as I'm sure all of you have, that we seem to find ourselves in this moment in our country where we almost are starting to seemingly hate each other more than we have problems with foreign nations that threaten our very security as a nation. And we've got to turn away from that. Both sides are very much to blame. We really do need to start as individuals self-reflecting on how we treat each other. I myself am hypocritical there. I've called my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, not as individuals, but as a group, disparaging things at times when I'm speaking to my community because I'm frustrated with how I'm being treated and consequently how my constituents are being treated. And every time I do it, I always feel like, I can do better than that. I have no right to tell others or suggest to others that we need to treat each other with respect if I'm not willing to do it on a consistent, everyday basis. So that's one of the great things about this community of legislators right here. We really do, I think, like each other and respect each other. We really try hard to figure it out. And it's a tough lift, Mr. Chair, when we have to operate on consensus, but it's amazing. When you don't have to win 51 to 49, you have to win 100 to 0. Going in day one, you're going to have to work hard to convince people. And so it's no longer about bullying. It's about influencing and convincing others that you are right. And a lot of times, if you're working that hard with people and you have to all work together, you're going to find that you weren't right about everything. As passionate as I can be, there are several people up here that have taught me a lot of things along the way that I was just flat out wrong about. And I'm glad that they did, because now I can be better going forward as I serve my constituents. And so it's really a wonderful setup we have here, and I hope it continues and grows in strength.
Good morning. And I represent House District 9, goes from the northern edge of Yamaha to the southern edge of Coos Bay. I have bookends. The Davids are my bookends. I have David Brocksmith to the south and David Gomberg to the north. My district has 4 counties, goes up the Umpqua to Scottsburg. It goes almost into Elmira. So instead of having a district like our metro colleagues do, which they can walk across in a couple hours, we have 100 miles to drive, so we cover a lot of territory. I want to touch on something David to my north said. We are purple districts. I represent a district that has every political persuasion in equal amounts. And so when I go into the Coastal Caucus or make decisions and I'm trying to discern how I support a very, very political district, this arena right here is how a lot of those questions get answered and how the thought process occurs that helps me figure out how to vote on bills that are very, very important to my district, where half of my folks are going to be mad. No matter what I do, half of them are going to be unhappy. So that puts us in really interesting positions when we're trying to make decisions about what we support. At the end of the day, 7 o'clock on Thursday morning, we show up in a room and we hash things out just like a family. Our swords cross, we duke things out, we come to consensus, and then we make a decision and then we collectively support it. And it's a pretty remarkable thing to see. And I've been honored for now almost 8 years to be a part of this caucus. It's very grounding as a legislator to have this to rely on as a place where you can go that's safe, have honest, frank conversations. At the end of the day, it all comes back to what's good for the coast, from the Washington border to the California border, and what's best for our constituents. So it's an honor to be a participant. I want to thank my colleagues for being there every Thursday morning and doing the good work that we can do to support our folks. And Congressman, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Let's give him a big round of applause. So let's talk about a few specifics that the Oregon Coastal Caucus has worked on and get a little update if we could. State legislature established the Oregon Shellfish Initiative Task Force in 2015. What is the status of some of the recommendations, and how does the Coastal Caucus prioritize implementation?
Well, in 2015, we recognized that we had some serious issues that were impacting our shellfish industry, particularly around oyster seed production. We had some issues with the quality of water, and you'll hear more about that later. But Senator Johnson and I passed a bill that formed a task force, came out of the Coastal Caucus, and it's been going on now for 3 sessions. It's very broad. 34 recommendations came out of a task force that came together with industry, shellfish processors, seed producers, ports, DSL, Department of Ag, ODF&W. We had a very broad array of stakeholders. And we worked for almost a year traveling up and down the coast trying to figure out where the issues were that we could deal with as a legislature. So for 3 sessions now, Senator Johnson and I in the Coastal Caucus have fought every year for a tranche of funding to address a number of issues that we identified. What do we do about ocean acidification and the impact on shellfish production? How do we get more land into production? How do we get the science done at Oregon State to make sure that the industry is viable and that we're ahead of the game with issues that may be popping up around diseases and those types of things? How do we just study the economics of the impact of shellfish on our coastal economy, which is huge? Is there an opportunity to grow? What are the best practices? And so it's been very broad. 34 recommendations came out. We tried to fund them quickly, but because of the constraints in the budget, we're coming in on a biannual basis and bringing the funding that we need to each one of these areas that we want to continue to support to make sure our shellfish industry is viable.
If I could add a couple of comments about that. The clarion call for me was Whiskey Creek Hatchery, and I think Mark Weigart is in the audience. Whiskey Creek had gone from producing literally billions of oyster larvae to none almost overnight. And that was the first kind of wake-up call for how serious the coastal shellfish issues were. I'm very pleased to say that with a little bit of money from the legislature and the enormous skill and responsiveness of OSU, we called the cavalry. The cavalry showed up. Agencies as part of the problem. We haven't moved the ball down the field at all. So this has to be harmonious, and we've got to have a regulatory framework and agency responsiveness that recognizes that there are real lives, real businesses, real problems on the coast that are not fixed from Salem by checking a regulatory box. And I applaud DEQ for responding to our concerns about how this new permit was going to be written. We still have the implementation part, and I would assume that that is going to be part of our Coastal Caucus agenda to make sure that there is equity in the rollout of the permit, and that in doing the permit, we don't damage businesses. The most egregious example, and I'm looking up on the monitor where I see one of our sponsors, Pacific Seafood had a plant that burned in my district, and they were getting ready to invest multiple millions of dollars in rebuilding that plant. Went to the agencies and said, what will be the standards by which our effluent will be measured? And the answer was pretty opaque. Build it and we'll let you know if you hit the mark. That's not good enough. We have to have objective standards. Everybody wants to follow the rules, but we've got to know what they are, and they can't be so disadvantageous that it has a chilling effect on business.
Yeah, I just want to say, this is another strength of the caucus. We had 2 people who were the leaders on this, Betsy and Caddy. They came to us and said, we need your help with this, but we've left them to do the work because there's only so much we can all do, and we split that up. And they have done an amazing job, first with getting the groups together to have the conversations, bring that back to us, and then we have the support structure to help them move it forward. We wish we could have gone faster, but we don't. And all of a sudden we found out a lot of information that we probably didn't know about our coast because of the work that was done by OSU and continues to happen. It is amazing. The scientists tell us that the next thing that's going to have a hard time if the ocean continues to get acidic are all of our mussels that are on the, and we don't have a lot of places that make mussels to save that particular problem. So we've got work to do, beach grass and all those other things, and seaweed and all those other things suck carbon out of the water. It makes it better. We found that in Netarts Bay. We found that in Coos Bay. It's really an interesting conversation that continues to go, in large part because of the work that Caddy and Betsy did to make sure that we took on the shellfish issue.
So let's shift to a different topic, if that's okay. Another issue that is near and dear to the coastal community is the Cascadia subduction zone. It's gotten a lot of national attention, I'd say some misattention because of some sensational articles from back east newspapers that don't understand what it means to live in a coastal community. What's the conversation been at the state level on that, and how can I help you guys, and how can the state and federal government partner on this?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I believe, and we believe, that it's time for Oregon to get serious about emergency planning. Very serious about emergency planning. And out here at the coast, I think we're doing better than most of Oregon is. We are educating our kids in our schools. We're putting together our Go Kits. We are publishing evacuation routes and painting blue lines on the sidewalk, and we're building state-of-the-art structures designed to withstand a major earthquake and a major tsunami to follow. But at the same time, I believe that most of Oregon is blithely indifferent to the personal risk when a 9.0 hits Oregon, and our policies are 30 years out of date. Now here's one example. In California, in the inundation zone, they build according to the newest and evolving building code standards in California. And in Washington, they have building code standards within the inundation zone. In Hawaii and Alaska, they have building code standards. But here in Oregon, we say, don't build anything. We say, don't build anything. And as we dug into that issue a little deeper, we learned that there was more to it than that. Because we, at the Coastal Caucus one morning, were presented with documents saying, if you want to retrofit your hospital or your police station or your schools or your fire department, there are state grants available. And we Googled those state grants only to find out, it says in bold print, not available in the inundation zone. Now let me say that another way, Congressman. If I want to retrofit and beef up a school gymnasium in Corvallis, the state will give me $2.5 million to help do that. If I want to move a school out of the inundation zone here at the coast, I can't apply for the money. That's wrong. And we need to change that. And so we took some steps to begin changing that. And the first thing we did is we passed legislation overwhelmingly in both houses that eliminated the 30-year-old prohibition on building within the inundation zone. And you're right, it got national attention. I was written up in New Yorker magazine. My wife was very proud. Why does Dave Garnberg want to kill coastal kids? And the answer is, we don't want to build new schools in the inundation zone, but we want local communities to have some flexibility to examine these questions. Because we know that the blue line is not a firm, safe standard, alive on one side and dead on the other. We know that these lines change with new science and new investigation. The lines are shifting, and we've got communities that have spent millions of dollars to move a fire station out of the inundation zone, only to find out that the inundation zone has moved once again, and the station is back inside the inundation zone. So what do we do about that? Well, the first thing is we took away the prohibition and give local communities more flexibility. The next step is going to be that we're going to adopt the same kind of building code standards that other states are using, so we can use the latest science and the latest information to move forward. There's a great example of this in my district in Newport, where Oregon State University is building the Marine Science Building according to the newest, most emerging, forward-thinking standards, a world-class example of how we can create a safe harbor within the inundation zone. A lot of controversy, a lot of conversation about that. I think it's a conversation worth having. But there are additional steps that we need to take. It's not just about drawing lines on the pavement, deciding what buildings go on one side and what buildings go on the other. As all of you know, the further that we move our fire stations and our police stations from our population centers and our commercial centers, and oh, by the way, our low-income residential clusters, the longer it's going to take for somebody to respond to a 911 call before that major earthquake occurs. And those are community concerns as well. And as I often say, how do you sell your house in a neighborhood that's too dangerous for a police station? How does it affect your ability to get insurance? How does it affect your resale value and your plans for the future? This has to be part of the conversation as well. But at the end of the day, we need to update our state thinking about emergency planning. And that not only involves building codes within the inundation zone, it's how we teach our kids and prepare our families, and how we structure our businesses, and how we educate the visitors that come out here to the coast. And at the end of the day, I look at our statewide planning goals. And our statewide planning goals, I think it's goal 7 that talks about emergency planning, says we are not allowed to build anything in Oregon within the earthquake zone. Look it up. That's what I'm talking about when I say it's time to get serious, because our standards are 30 years out of date. We can do better than that, and we must do better than that.
I don't know how much more I can add to that. Thank you, Representative. But this is a great example of the bipartisan, bicameral work that we do in coming together on this issue. I've never, ever had more emails on a coastal issue from people that live on I-5 than this issue. It was quite astonishing. You know, the people on the Oregon coast, everyone in this room, if you're from the Oregon coast, you're familiar with the information and the devastation that will occur when the Cascadia event occurs. In my district, is 4 times more likely to have an 8.0 or greater earthquake than the rest of the Cascadia zipper, if you will. And we do, as the good representative spoke earlier, a tremendous amount of education in informing our citizenry of the problems that will and could exist. But we have to still allow the building. As the good representative said, goal 7, the earthquake zone is everything from I-5 to the coast, that we wouldn't have the building occur. And so we must, as a state, come together with the help of the federal government in preparing for not only the infrastructure necessary, but also to prepare for those impacts that are going to occur and how we're going to be able to move forward and manage once, of course, the event occurs. So, again, I appreciate the colleagues' support and our colleagues' support in the building and assisting us in moving that legislation forward. And that's one chip at the armor of things that need to change with the land use laws in our state.
So I just want to add, getting prepared is really important, but keeping people's interest in preparing for events that happen 300 to 1,000 years apart is really difficult. There's only a few people in this building whose ancestors were here the last time, and they're mostly sitting up here, our tribal representatives. It's really hard to pump up, oh, there's someone over here too again. It's really hard to pump up people's enthusiasm to really make those preparations. So knowledge is really, really important. Some of the events were 1,000 years apart, so we only got 600 years to go. We don't have any idea yet. The federal government is doing some stuff on early warning to try to help make sure that if you're in an emergency room having an operation and the earthquake happens, the generators happen before the earthquake cuts it all out. There is some interesting information that's going around that the federal government's been working on. So we're trying to get more information. There's a group sitting way back over in the corner from a special place in Tillamook County called Near Space Research. And if they want to stand up, they can, so other people can see them. If you're interested in trying to figure out how to find a site where we can start preparing people as a community up and down the coast, they're trying to figure out how do we get all these coastal people to get together and figure out what's the best things to have, what's the best equipment to have, how best to distribute it, what do we need to know. Get a hold of those people. They're here because they want to make sure that they do that. And it's really a neat thing. If you have not been to Near Space Research, they have the Johnson Space Center, named after Bessie Johnson. And if you watch people jump out of balloons in the atmosphere, way up, the longest parachute jump, they got up there because Near Space Research made the platform, the balloon, to get them up there. They work with NASA, they work with everybody. They're an amazing little company. And Betsy, again, had a lot of influence when that used to be in her district. Before I stole it, as the redistricting has taken place. But really great people thinking about things. They've been working with other people in our state on drones and how to use those in emergencies like that to do things that we need to do. We need to be prepared. We need to make sure that everybody understands what could happen. But we don't need to draconianly say you can't live on the places everybody's wanted to live on all their life. There would not be a seaside. There's just no place to get to in seaside. So look at the coast, understand this, understand the perils and be prepared for whatever's going to happen. But I think what we try to do is take a rational approach to figuring out how to make sure with building codes and other things that after the event, there will still be structures where people can shelter and do some other kinds of things like they're doing at Oregon State. So I'm proud of the people here.
I'm just curious, how many of you read the paper about the passage of the bill that Representative Gomberg talked about and said the legislature's nuts? Did any of you see that? I mean, it literally was characterized as Coastal Caucus advocates for a bill that wants to kill children. The press was, in my opinion, with respect, Mr. Hughes, irresponsible in that reporting. And there were good and valid reasons that the Coastal Caucus pitched for that bill, but it was just funny to me that it was characterized the way that it was. And the point that I want to make is it's not just the coast. I grew up in Central Oregon. I packed a house with an impending forest fire. My helicopter company used to fly on fires. So it isn't just what could happen at the coast in the case of a natural disaster. It's that urban-forest interface. It is the possibility of earthquake. It is the possibility of all kinds of the wrath of Mother Nature. So I think we focused a lot on the coast, but we need to think about inland. You mentioned Seaside, and I found it fascinating that there was a credible tsunami warning for Seaside at one point, and a lot of people at night raced up into the Coast Range with their Maypop tires, and they got up to the Elsie Vine Maple Fire Station only to discover that there was no power there. So it isn't a matter of just getting people off the coast, it's how do you accommodate them as they come into other places away from the coast. They're told go upland. But if you go upland and it's completely congested on the highways, there's no power. We fixed Elsie Vine Maple Fire Station, they now have a generator. But the point of the story is a lot of the emphasis has been on the coast. It's statewide, and I share the opinion that we don't have a plan. And we are reacting to current technology. The next panel is going to talk about some other ideas. Senator Benson and I had a chance to talk about this morning. There is technology and ideas that we're not even talking about. Desalinization for the provision of potable water. We're going to talk about that next session. But we are reacting, in my opinion, right now to current technology. We're not thinking very proactively about what we could be doing both on the coast and inland.
So I would just echo some of the comments here. At the federal level, the Federal Emergency Management Agency is sometimes part of the solution, but oftentimes for our coastal community, a big part of the problem. To their comments on the inundation zones changing on sometimes a frequent basis, based on new information, they would, Tillamook, the town of Tillamook should not exist based on those maps. And there'd be no economic opportunity in a very vibrant portion of our great state. The coast is trying to reinvent itself, trying to, really give some family wage jobs to people there. And it's really galling at the federal level as well as at the state level to hear agencies cavalierly dismiss your community as not important, shouldn't be there, please move on. And that's insulting. That's insulting. And to Senator Johnson's point, what about all those people in New York City that get hurricanes on a regular basis? Are they going to abandon Manhattan Island? Are we going to get rid of the coastal communities in Florida? How about the Midwest with these huge floods? We're going to get rid of all those communities along the Mississippi and Missouri River because we have these horrible floods much more often than the 1,000-year or 600-year tsunamis. I mean, these folks need to get an education, and these, your members, I drive with the rest of your delegation back in D.C. They'll let people know, disasters are disasters. I don't care if they're wildfires, floods, tsunamis, hurricanes, you name it. We all are in a little bit of danger. A risk you take as a human, figure out where you want to live and raise your family. And I resent the federal government telling me I can't live or do here when my family's been here for generations. I have that opportunity to take that risk. I will try and mitigate that risk. Everyone lives on the coast. They know there's a risk. But it's where you want to be. It's where you want to spend your life, however long that is. And I think that's worthy, and it's great. History of our tribal communities, they first settled the coast. They didn't settle on a mountaintop. They settled to the coast. They didn't settle in the desert. They settled the coast. So I think there's a great opportunity for us to send a message back east and to our folks in the cities who I think are very sympathetic if we just get the right language across. Dollars are an issue. I look forward to working with you guys. The thing that your delegation here does very, very well is leverage very precious taxpayer dollars back east. And that's by working in a collaborative manner. I can sell a lot of the grant programs for our communities here on the Oregon coast because we have this bipartisan collaboration where you've got the cities, the counties, and your state legislature putting some money in the pot. That's a lot easier for me to say, hey, okay, federal government's not funding the whole thing, we'll fund a little bit. We get transportation grants that way, we get FEMA grants that way, we get Sea Grant grants that way. There's all sorts of opportunities. It's because these folks work closely together and enjoy working with them. Speaking of grants and opportunities, we've talked a little bit, I know, in the state legislature. We're trying to do it at the federal level, and I alluded to it a bit in my remarks. Infrastructure. The coast has some unique and sometimes not so unique infrastructure needs. A little different spin than the traffic across the Columbia River in Portland. There's a lot more to the state than that congestion area. Could we talk a little bit about what you guys think are some of the more pressing needs that hopefully for my edification work back east for you?
Dredging.
Thank you, Senator.
Housing.
Jetties.
Water storage is a big issue in the coast. We're a desert all summer, and most people don't realize that. And most of our water runs into the ocean. It's not very useful when it's in the ocean. So if we don't store it, we're in trouble.
Absolutely. Water supply, and not only storage, but also water disposal.
Yeah, they're just happy they got their dam bill passed. And sign, excuse me. No, this is a great question. I mean, the infrastructure needs across the coast are somewhat unique as well because of the demographics that we have and the geology and the armoring and the land use laws that might work for the Willamette Valley or Eastern Oregon that just don't work for the coastal communities. I mean, the coastal communities have, like I mentioned earlier, folks that work in Newport and some of the service-based industries have to drive and live an hour away to get to work. And so as we look at other legislation in the building, we talk about those needs and things that occur with those coastal residents and how they're going to be impacted. We strive for economic development on the coast. There's, again, 750,000 individuals flowing into Florence. But again, they need that infrastructure in place to be able to support those folks. We attempt to move projects forward that will assist in our coastal communities, such as the dam project in Newport, and the work that you've done, Representative McEwen, with the rail systems in Coos Bay and those connected. We have the Slam and Salmon Derby down in Brookings Harbor at the end of the month. But we also were able to invest in the Port of Port Orford this year. And we also have investments that are potentially working with the state agencies, such as the Pacific Connector gas pipeline, that will bring in billions to the state and jobs associated with that, and support schools and infrastructure around Southwest Oregon that has been devastated since the timber wars. And so there's lots of opportunities as we move forward to bring investment and that investment into that infrastructure. But we need to, as the good senators spoke about earlier, streamline the land use laws and the agencies so we can get them to yes on these projects and get things done for the Oregon coast and Oregonians all over the state.
So ports and dredging are certainly critical to many of our coastal communities. And at the same time, our smaller communities are challenged by the big expense of infrastructure projects like water and sewer. I think of the dam project in Newport, which not only supports the 10,000 people that live there, but the 50,000 people that visit every weekend. But I wanted to touch on something else, and it goes back to your question about Cascadia, and it's our transportation infrastructure. The legislature passed game-changing, generational-changing investments in transportation infrastructure the session before last. A very important change in Oregon. But if you look at the investment strategy that the state is considering right now, they're looking at 10-year plans. And the first 10-year plans is to beef up our highways, airports, and infrastructure in Central Oregon. Because when Cascadia slips, Central Oregon is going to be the lifeline across the state. So the first investment is in the highways there. The second 10-year set of investments will be in I-5 and our Portland bridges, where our population centers are, which means that our third 10-year investment strategy will come to the coast, and our highways and our bridges here. Now, to some degree, that makes some sense, but that's a small comfort to those of us that live here and work here and have businesses here, or the people that want a vacation here, that we're looking at 2030, 2040 before we start working on our rusting bridges and our crumbling highway structure.
David has a solution for that. He has his part of 101 fall into the ocean every couple of years, so he gets a lot of work.
Oh, no, it's job security.
So to the infrastructure topic, some of the things that come to mind for me that are really important in my opinion are, thanks to the good co-chair and many of the individuals on this stage, we were able to get some very needed funding for the now what is the up-and-coming ER room that will be completed in the Brookings Harbor area. That was the oldest incorporated city as far as the demographics there because of the mass influx of retirees from other states, and yet we did not actually have a functioning ER room in Brookings. And so those individuals were having to go all the way down to Crescent City, California, and that's problematic for several reasons. One, it's a very long drive to there for someone who's having a heart attack, even in the best of circumstances. And so we've had folks dying early in life that should not have, and so a lot of those folks will remain living and investing in this economy, but those investment dollars to save those folks' life, both on the front end and the long-term care to get them back up and running, was all going into the California economy, not here in Oregon, and that's going to start turning around thanks to that investment. But even things like, and coming from a blood red district Republican like myself, some people find it strange that I'm a very big promoter of solar technology and the new developing battery technology. When it comes to infrastructure, I think of power independence, and as the new technologies continue to become more affordable and available, I think it's really important that we knuckle down, and folks like myself take it upon ourselves to educate our communities on how to properly invest when they're building, especially new affordable housing, whether it's just multi-complexes or single-family housing. We need to be looking at what strategic investments we can make to make sure that when we do have a Cascadia event, or we have the big snowstorm that we had earlier this year where 101 gets wiped out, that was problematic in many ways. The fuel storage issue, I've recently become a little bit more aware of how on the coast, and probably throughout much of the state, but on the coast, we do not have adequate fuel storage. So when the grid goes down, you need gasoline, you need diesel. Hopefully you have batteries and generators and solar and all that to keep you going, but we need to start making those strategic investments. Now, I don't believe the government is always the best place to force those strategies to be adopted. I think it's better that we take the lead from an education standpoint. Furthermore, I think we need to really look at the efficiency side of things. You can dramatically decrease the investment of solar and batteries needed to keep you going without the grid's use when you invest in the right water heaters, ductless mini split, heat pump systems. There's just amazing technology coming to the market these days that is becoming more and more available, more and more affordable, more reliable, and coastal communities like ours really do need to start taking a step forward and really heavily investing in that, in my opinion. But yeah, no, infrastructure is critical for a community like this.
Congressman, I appreciate you bringing up this topic because it's very near and dear to my heart. And I'll give a nod to Senator Johnson and Senator Bentz, who are here this morning, for partnering on the House Bill 2017 in 2017, which raised revenue, $5.3 billion in Oregon, to invest in our highway infrastructure. It's critical. We looked at our voters and promised them that we wouldn't raise their gas tax again for 10 years. We're going to make significant investments, and that was a really, really big deal for the state. But I really look forward to partnering with our congressional delegation on moving something forward at the federal level. I don't think the federal gas tax has been raised in over 20 years, 25, 30 years, even a penny. And we're doing a 10-year plan where we're raising it incrementally over 10 years. And it's the Fed's time to step up and help us. It's really critical that we get ahead of the deterioration that's occurring. But I don't want to just talk about highway infrastructure, which is roads, bridges, and pavement and culverts. We have non-highway modes of transportation that need investment as well. And it's rail, and it's aviation, it's transit, it's bike peds, all of those other things that are not paid for in the traditional way. Those things concern me greatly. And investing in that type of infrastructure across this state is absolutely critical too. Tends to be the poor stepchild, tends to be harder to raise money for, but when you look at a transportation system, it's just as important that that all connect up with our highway system as investing in the highway system. So I just don't want to lose sight of the fact that the partnership that the states have with the federal government on paying for this infrastructure is so critical, and we'll look to you for leadership and see what can happen in the future to help us.
Well, that's a good challenge, and I accept that challenge, actually. It's really, really important to have the partnership. As I alluded to earlier, there's not enough money currently in the Highway Trust Fund. It's being exhausted as we speak. And to Kathy's point, there's a lot more to infrastructure, transportation, than just highways, and a lot of folks need that opportunity.
And Congressman, if I might, I want to touch on one thing you said very early on, which is so critical, and it's opening up the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. I started lobbying for this in 2004. It's been a long time coming. I understand there's a glimmer of hope that that lock may come off that box and that money be able to get spent for dredging, jetties, all of those coastal things that we all need. I really appreciate your work on that. It's really critical.
Well, and it's fun to work on these types of issues. There is unanimity on the need. It's the funding sources that are always the issue. The state legislatures around the country have stepped up. Oregon, New Jersey, Texas, I believe. You know, a lot of states have had the courage to do it. I don't know too many legislators that have been voted out of office because they've provided adequate transportation opportunities in their community. And certainly here on the coast with 101, the harbors, the ports that we have, I mean, I think everyone in this room understands the need. You know, and it's the old story. If everyone's willing to put in a little bit, everyone's willing to share some of the burden. And at the federal level, Kurt Schrader's perfect idea would be to make sure bicycles pay, buses pay, electric cars pay, not just gas or diesel vehicles. There's got to be an opportunity. And I think, you know, frankly, on the energy side, I think there's some great opportunities there too. We have a lot of states, no matter if they're blue, red, or purple, doing wind and solar. Other renewable energy projects. It's a component of what I would call an all of the above energy strategy. You don't get to there by telling people they don't matter, their communities don't matter, we're going to stop all drilling, we're going to stop all this stuff. There's huge bipartisan support in the Gulf of Mexico for oil drilling. That may seem anathema to us out here, and we work very hard to make sure there's not oil drilling off our coast, because of our fisheries, because of the tourist industry. But for those folks down there, part of the art of being a legislator, a good congressperson or state legislator, is respecting the fact that other parts of our state, other parts of our country, their livelihood, their family's existence depends on being able to do some of that. And our job is to do it as safely as possible and maybe wean people off of that energy dependence onto something a little better, something that's maybe better for our atmosphere, for our climate, for the future of our kids. But you can't do it with the heavy hand of, it's going to be just my way or the highway. That never works. These folks here understand that. And it's not always about getting your way or convincing somebody else that you're right and they're wrong. I've never been very successful in that. Most people are pretty certain they've got a great point of view and it's legitimate. The trick is to accept the fact that that person's point of view is legitimate. And then work to say, hey, accept my point of view, and then how can we get there? That's the art of legislating. That's the art of governing. That's, once you're an activist, that's great, but once you get elected, and you're sitting up here, or sitting in Salem, or Washington, D.C., your job, in my opinion, is to get something done and represent your communities. These folks do a great job there. I'm going to probably end, maybe go on forever and ever. A lot of great issues. I've heard some very thoughtful things. Hopefully my team was taking notes on the infrastructure piece that y'all were talking about. Let's give these round of excellent legislators a big